At midnight, a broke trucker's rig died on a frozen Wyoming road. One man, Jake, a struggling mechanic, heard the knock, grabbed his tools, and crawled through the snow to help, asking for nothing. Days later, over 200 rigs thundered into his dusty garage lot, not for repairs, but to repay a kindness that echoed across the highways. What began as a favor turned into a movement that would change his life forever. Hit like and comment where you're watching from. Your support brings more amazing stories. Now let's begin. It was past midnight when Jake Palmer heard the desperate knock. The wind was howling outside his small-town repair garage in rural Wyoming. The kind of cold that turned metal brittle and made even headlights flicker like dying stars. Jake, a 42-year-old mechanic with grease-stained hands and a heart too stubborn to quit, wiped the oil from his fingers and opened the door. A trucker stood there exhausted, shivering, and apologetic. His rig had blown a fuel line 6 miles out, and no other shop would answer. Jake did not hesitate. He grabbed his coat, loaded his tools, and followed the stranger into the night. The truck was a battered long hauler hauling fresh produce east, and its driver, a man named Rick, looked like he had not slept in days. Jake did not ask questions. He lay flat on his back in the snow, flashlight in teeth, as diesel fumes mixed with frost in the air. 2 hours later, the line was patched with parts Jake could barely afford to spare. Rick offered what little cash he had, but Jake raised his hand and said firmly, "No charge. You've got miles to go. Keep it safe." Rick stared at him, confused. "Why?" Jake shrugged. "Because someone once helped me when I was out of gas and out of hope. I pay it forward." Rick climbed into his rig and disappeared into the snow, promising he would find a way to return the favor. Jake doubted he would. Most people meant well, but life got in the way. He went back inside, lit the old space heater, and sat alone with a thermos of black coffee, staring at the wall where a faded photo of his late father hung. His mentor, the man who taught him to fix engines and live honest. Jake's shop had been running on fumes for months, bills piled higher than the snow outside. But something in his bones told him he had done the right thing. He had no idea that within a few days, his life in his little garage would become the center of something no one in that town had ever seen before. 3 days passed. The snow had finally begun to melt, revealing the muddy scars it left behind. Jake was under a '98 Chevy with a rusted axle when he heard a low rumble outside. Not unusual in a town full of pickups and tractors. But this sound grew louder, deeper, more persistent. He wiped his face, crawled out, and froze. There, idling just beyond the gravel lot, were 5 big rigs, gleaming chrome, paint polished to mirror shine. Their engines growled like giants clearing their throats. Jake stepped out slowly, still holding his wrench, unsure if he was dreaming. The drivers, men and women of all ages, stepped down one by one, walking toward him like something out of a movie. "You Jake Palmer?" the lead driver asked, a woman in her 40s with steely eyes and a Texas drawl. Jake nodded, confused. "We're here because of Rick," she said. "Rick, the trucker from the other night. He told his story on Trucker Talk Radio," another added. A younger man in a camouflage cap said you fixed him up for free when no one else would. "Said you saved his haul?" That story blew up. Folks started sharing it. "Said we should find you. Thank you. Pay it forward." Before Jake could respond, another rig rolled in. Then 2 more, then 5. Within an hour, the dirt road outside was packed with semis, their trailers gleaming under the afternoon sun. Some bore produce, others furniture, some nothing at all. They had just come to meet him, to shake his hand, to see the man who reminded them of the kind of America they feared was disappearing. Jake's tiny garage looked like a dollhouse next to the towering rigs. His heart pounded as he walked between the trucks, shaking hands, accepting back slaps, and awkwardly laughing. Many brought business. Brakes that needed adjusting, tires that needed patching. Some just came with coffee, pie, and stories from the road. That night, Jake sat outside on an overturned milk crate, staring at the endless line of trucks still arriving in the dark. His phone, dusty and forgotten for months, buzzed with messages, news outlets, trucker forums, even someone from a national morning show. He had not asked for any of this, but something was changing, and the road outside his little shop had just become the most important route in the country. By the next morning, Jake's gravel lot looked like a truck stop in a major city. Local law enforcement had to redirect traffic as rigs continued to roll in, some coming from neighboring states. A few drivers even slept in their cabs overnight just to be there. Jake's tools were worn, his hands blistered, and he had barely slept, but he refused to turn anyone away. One driver handed him a fresh set of tires. "On the house," the man said. "Your story reminded me why I started driving in the first place." Another brought parts, new spark plugs, filters, brake pads, all donated by a trucking supply company in Ohio that had heard about him through a podcast. Jake's workbench, once bare, was now piled high with supplies he could never afford on his own. The scent of diesel and fresh brewed coffee hung in the air as drivers passed around the offered to help with repairs. It was not just truckers. Locals started showing up too. Farmers who remembered Jake fixing their tractors years ago. Mothers who recalled him patching up their minivans for half the usual cost. One woman brought a basket of biscuits and jam. Another, a retired welder, offered to help build a bigger garage right there with his own hands. Jake's quiet world had erupted into motion, but somehow it did not feel chaotic. It felt right. He worked with quiet determination, often refusing tips, though some drivers snuck envelopes of cash into his toolbox. Anyway, a group of drivers pulled their money to install a new heater in his waiting area. Another bought a brand new lift hoist for the garage delivered straight from a supplier who had watched the viral clip of Jake crawling in the snow at midnight. Word kept spreading. A video of Jake wiping his hands and smiling awkwardly as he repaired a rig had already hit 2 million views. Reporters began calling. A national trucking magazine requested an interview. Jake declined most of it, unsure how to handle the spotlight. He was not trying to become famous. He just believed in helping someone when you could. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Jake leaned against a trailer beside a fire pit some drivers had built from scrap. The warmth flickered on his face as laughter and stories echoed around him. For the first time in years, Jake felt something he thought he had lost forever: belonging. By the 5th day, Jake's garage had become more than just a pit stop. It had become a symbol. A patch of frozen ground in Wyoming had turned into sacred soil for truckers, those often overlooked, often underpaid, and rarely thanked. And Jake, he had become something like a folk hero. A man in a tailored coat stepped out of a black SUV that morning, clipboard in hand and a polished smile on his face. "Mr. Palmer," he said, "I'm from Titan Freight Logistics. We manage over 800 trucks across the Midwest. We heard what's happening here. Corporate wants to partner with you. They're offering full sponsorship, equipment, facility upgrades, even staff." Jake blinked, unsure if he was still dreaming. Sponsorship, real money? His father had spent his whole life fighting to keep this garage alive with grit and elbow grease. Now, here was a giant corporation offering everything he had ever needed, served up neatly on a clipboard. But before Jake could answer, another truck rolled in. An old Peterbilt with faded red paint and a broken step. The driver was a woman in her 60s, weathered and proud. She smiled at Jake, holding out a photo of her late husband. "He drove for 30 years, she said. "Broke down in a blizzard once. Nobody stopped, but he always believed that kindness was still out there. If he'd met you, he'd know he was right." Jake looked around. There were no boardrooms here, no polished shoes or elevator pitches, just boots in the mud, cracked knuckles, and hearts that still believed in loyalty. He glanced at the clipboard, then wordlessly handed it back. "I'm not selling this place," he said gently. "This isn't a business deal. This is a brotherhood." Word of his decision spread faster than wildfire. Drivers who had been skeptical before now lined up to shake his hand. One carved a handmade wooden sign that read, "Jake's Way, no one left behind." That afternoon, truckers set up a food station offering stew and cornbread to anyone who passed through. A young boy with his father handed Jake a thank you card covered in crayon trucks. Jake knelt down, eyes misty, and told him, "This shop will still be here when you're old enough to drive." He meant it. Because Jake finally understood something he had not seen clearly before. He had not just fixed rigs, he had sparked a movement. By the end of the week, Jake's garage was no longer just a stop on the side of a forgotten road. It had become a pilgrimage site. The final count was staggering. Over 200 rigs had come through in 6 days. Local authorities had to section off nearby farmland for overflow parking. News vans arrived. Jake's face appeared on television screens across the country. "Mailbox. You can always come home."